The palace of the emperor was the grandest in the galaxy. Towers touched the skies, walls shone with golden light, and alien guards from 100 worlds marched through its halls. Every corner of the empire respected the emperor's power. He had crushed rebellions, defeated armadas, and broken kings. Yet in the heart of his palace there was a secret shame, something that no army, no fleet, and no magic could control. The emperor's baby dragons. They were small, yes, barely the height of a child. Their wings were not yet strong enough to carry them far. Their teeth were still growing, but they carried the full fury of their bloodline. Fire in their throats, claws sharper than steel, and eyes that glowed like molten gold. No one could handle them. The first babysitter had been a proud corps matron, tall and armored. She entered the nursery with confidence. Minutes later, she ran screaming through the palace halls, armor scorched, her long crest smoking. "Monsters," she cried. "They are cursed." The second was an Avar caretaker, known for calming even the wildest star beasts. He lasted half a day before one dragon bit his tail clean off. He fled, swearing never to return. One by one, they came. One by one, they failed. The corridors began to echo with terrible sounds, roars, shrieks, and bursts of fire that scorched the walls black. The royal nursery looked less like a place for young heirs and more like a battlefield. Pillows were torn to ash, tables split in half, food scattered across the floor like wreckage. The air always smelled of smoke and fear. The emperor's advisors tried to hide the truth. They told the empire the heirs were spirited and strong. But the palace servants knew better. Each day, another babysitter fled. Some left with burns, others with claw marks, and a few did not leave at all. The dragons had no mercy for weakness. Rumors spread through the empire. In the outer colonies, merchants whispered, "The emperor cannot control his own children. What will happen when they grow?" Soldiers joked bitterly in the barracks, "We fear no army, but we fear the nursery." The emperor's rage grew. He had faced assassins, traitors, even ancient beasts of war. But his own children defied him. Every time he entered the nursery, the dragons hissed and spat. They leaped from the shadows, biting and clawing. His robes were torn, his crown nearly melted by bursts of fire. One evening, a council of nobles gathered in secret. They spoke in hushed tones beneath the painted ceiling of the grand hall. "This curse will ruin us," one hissed. "No empire can respect a ruler who cannot tame his heirs," said another. "The throne will fall into chaos." They all agreed on one thing: if the dragons could not be controlled, the empire itself was in danger. Meanwhile, in the nursery, the dragons grew wilder. Their games became wars. They clawed at the guards who brought their meals. They snapped at the healers who tried to check their health. Their wings smashed windows, their roars shook chandeliers. Even the bravest soldiers of the empire begged not to be assigned to nursery duty. Every new babysitter was introduced with hope. And every time, the hope ended in disaster. One alien caretaker, Azelle, who had raised 30 hatchlings of her own, believed she would succeed where others had failed. "They are only children," she declared proudly. "They only need firm discipline." Within an hour, she was limping down the halls, her robes in flames, screaming for water. The dragons had actually laughed as she fled, and so the pattern repeated. The palace began to keep a list, scratched onto the stone near the nursery doors. It was meant as a record of service. Instead, it became a graveyard of names each, one crossed out as another sitter failed. Servants began calling it the Wall of the Doomed. When the list grew too long, even the boldest aliens refused the emperor's summons. "No gold is worth my life," they said. "No honor is worth those monsters." The emperor could not show weakness, but inside he felt the weight of shame. He sat alone in the throne room at night, staring at the high windows. Hearing the distant roars of his children echo through the palace walls, his people thought him all-powerful, unbreakable. Yet what king could not even bring peace to his own family? The curse became legend. Travelers whispered of it in spaceports. "Beware the emperor's hatchlings," they said. "They burn everything they touch." Some even claimed that dragons were not natural. "They are cursed by the gods," one priest muttered. "They were born of fire and death." And still the dragons grew. Stronger wings, sharper teeth, louder roars. No one could guess how long before their power grew too much for the palace walls to contain. One night, as the moons of the imperial world cast silver light through the nursery windows, the emperor himself stood before the locked doors. He listened as his children shrieked and fought within. He clenched his fists until the golden rings cut his skin. If he could not master them, what would become of his throne? He thought of his ancestors, who had tamed armies, who had commanded fleets. Would their ghosts laugh at him now? At last he turned away, cloak trailing across the polished floor. His face was hard, but his eyes showed a truth no one dared speak. Feared in the palace halls, whispers spread like smoke. The airs were untouchable, uncontrollable, cursed, and no one, not the emperor, not his court, not the strongest aliens of the empire could find a way to tame them. But soon someone would try. Someone unlike all the others. Someone who was not of the empire, not bound by fear, and not blinded by tradition. A human, and with that, the story of the emperor's curse was about to change forever. The sun rose over the imperial palace, casting golden rays across the shining towers. To the people outside, the emperor still seemed like a god of power, touchable, eternal. But inside the palace, behind guarded doors and silenced halls, the truth was darker. The emperor could not control his own heirs. The baby dragons had become a storm that no one could calm. The nursery, once decorated with silks and jewels, now looked like a battlefield. Curtains burned to ash, floors scarred by claw marks, chandeliers melted from sudden bursts of flame. Guards avoided the place. Servants refused to enter. Even the bravest warriors of the empire turned pale when ordered to approach. The emperor's pride was bleeding away. He had conquered galaxies. He had forced mighty rulers to kneel. He had survived assassination attempts, cosmic plagues, and wars that shattered star systems. Yet here he was, helpless in front of his own children. Each day, advisors brought new solutions. One suggested binding the dragons with enchanted chains. The dragons snapped the chains apart like twigs. Another brought armored guards with shields reinforced by plasma steel. The dragons melted them into puddles of glowing slag. A magician from the far colonies claimed he could calm the beasts with spells. He lasted 3 minutes before fleeing with his robes on fire. The emperor's patience grew thin. His temper, once feared across the stars, turned into despair. Late at night, he would stand at the balcony of his chambers, staring down at the sprawling city below. The lights of millions of citizens glowed like stars. They all believed their emperor was strong. None of them knew that inside the palace walls, he was losing a private war, and the rumors were spreading. Whispers floated from servant to guard, from guard to merchant, from merchant to traveler. The emperor's heirs cannot be tamed, they said. The dragons are cursed. Some claimed the empire was doomed that, when the hatchlings grew, they would burn the throne itself. Others laughed in secret, mocking the emperor behind his back. The emperor heard these whispers. They cut deeper than any sword. At the next council meeting, his nobles gathered in a glittering chamber filled with jeweled banners. Their voices rose like blades. If word spreads further, the empire will lose faith, one said. Our enemies will use this weakness against us, another added. What if the dragons grow stronger? What if they escape the palace? The emperor slammed his fist against the table, silencing them. His voice thundered. They are my children. They are the blood of emperors. You dare call them monsters? The chamber fell silent, but the fear in the noble's eyes remained. That night, the emperor went to the nursery himself. He entered without guards, his golden cloak dragging behind him. The air was thick with smoke. The dragons leaped from the shadows, wings flapping, teeth snapping. They growled and circled him. The emperor stood tall, refusing to retreat. You are mine, he whispered. You are my heirs. You will obey. But the dragons only hissed louder. One spat a burst of fire that nearly caught his crown. Another snapped at his arm, tearing his sleeve. They did not see him as father or ruler. They saw him as prey. When he left the nursery, his hands trembled. For the first time in his life, the emperor felt true fear. Days turned into weeks. No sitter lasted. The list of failures grew longer. The nobles grew restless. The empire whispered louder, and then, as one of his closest advisors approached him with a suggestion so strange, so outrageous that the emperor nearly laughed. Let a human try. The emperor froze. A human. Those fragile creatures from the outer colonies. They are weak. They are prey, not caretakers. But the advisor bowed low. Majesty, we have tried every alien race, every method. None have succeeded. The humans are different. They survive where others should not. They find tricks where others see walls. Perhaps one of them can do what no one else has. The emperor dismissed him at first. It was ridiculous. How could a human succeed where Quar warriors, Avar caretakers, and Zel matriarchs had failed? Humans were known across the galaxy as clever scavengers, but they were still frail. What chance would one have against dragons born of fire? And yet, the emperor thought of his failures. He thought of the nobles' whispers, the servants' fear, the spreading rumors that stained his empire. He thought of his ancestors, who had faced the impossible and won. Could it be that the answer lay not in strength, but in something else? That night, as the moons hung heavy in the sky, the emperor sat alone in the throne room. His crown weighed on his head like iron. The echoes of dragon roars rattled through the palace walls at last. He made his decision. Summon a human nurse, he ordered. If no alien can tame them, then let us see what humanity can do. The command shocked the court. Nobles protested. Generals sneered. This is madness, they cried. No human can survive. But the emperor silenced them with a glare. His voice was low, heavy with finality. Better madness than defeat. Better a human's trick than an emperor's shame. And so the summons was sent, across stars and systems, calling for a human brave or foolish enough to face the cursed. Hatchlings of the emperor. The nursery roared louder that night. As if the dragons themselves sensed what was coming, the servants trembled. The nobles whispered. And far away, on a distant world, a human nurse received an invitation unlike any other. The empire waited. The airs raged, and the emperor held his breath, because if this failed, there would be nothing left to try. The palace gates had seen warlords, kings, and alien nobles come and go. But on this day, they opened for someone very different. A single, human woman stepped through, carrying nothing but a small bag and a calm expression. The guards stared in disbelief. She was not armored like the core warriors. She did not carry the tools of the Avar beastkeepers. She wore no shimmering robes of sorcery. Instead, she walked with quiet confidence, her plain clothes neat, her hair tied back, her eyes steady. The nobles had gathered to watch, sneering behind jeweled fans and golden masks. She will last an hour, one whispered. Perhaps less, another chuckled. Send for the healers now, a third muttered. The emperor sat on his throne, silent, his face carved from stone. He had given the order, but even he doubted. Still, he would not show weakness. He gestured, and the human was led toward the nursery. The hall leading to the nursery was quiet. Too quiet. Servants bowed their heads and refused to meet her eyes. The air smelled faintly of smoke. The walls bore dark scars clawed deep into the stone. The deeper she walked, the heavier the silence became, broken only by distant growls. At last she stood before the great doors of the nursery. 2 guards held the locks, their hands shaking as they reached for the keys. One guard glanced at her, his voice low and fearful. You can still turn back, human. No one will blame you. But the woman only smiled faintly. Children are children, she said, even if they breathe fire. The doors groaned open. A wave of heat hit her, thick and choking. The chamber inside was chaos, billows torn apart, shards of furniture scattered, burn marks across the floor. The air shimmered from fire, still clinging to the walls. And in the center, 3 baby dragons crouched, their golden eyes glowing. They were smaller than she expected, but their presence filled the room like giants. Their wings stretched wide, claws digging into the floor. They hissed when they saw her, smoke curling from their nostrils. Most caretakers would have flinched. Most would have turned and run. The human didn't either. She stepped forward slowly, carefully, as if approaching frightened children instead of predators. The dragons growled louder. One snapped its jaws, the crack echoing like thunder. Another beat its wings, sending gusts of hot air whipping through the room. The third let out a roar so sharp that glass jars on the shelves shattered. From the doorway, the nobles smirked. "She will scream soon," one whispered. "She will burn," another replied. But the human only crouched low, meeting the dragon's glowing eyes at their level. She did not show fear. She did not raise her voice. She simply looked at them as if she understood. "Hungry?" she asked softly. The dragons blinked. For the first time, they hesitated. The human reached into her bag and pulled out something simple. A small container of food. Not palace delicacies, not magical potions, not golden offerings. Just plain noodles with broth and herbs. She placed it on the floor between them and waited. The dragons sniffed the air, suspicious. One snarled, baring its sharp teeth. But another tilted its head, curious. Slowly, it crept forward, sniffing the noodles. Then, with a surprising gentleness, it slurped one into its mouth. The others watched. Their growls softened. The second dragon tried a bite, then the third, and suddenly, the room was quiet. For the first time in the emperor's palace, the dragons were not screaming or burning or clawing. They were simply eating. The human smiled, her calm never breaking. She sat cross-legged on the floor, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. The dragons ate noisily, their golden eyes no longer blazing with rage, but gleaming with something else, curiosity, maybe even trust. From the doorway, the noble's sneers faded into shock. "Impossible," one whispered. She tamed them. Another gasped, but the emperor only watched, his face unreadable. Deep inside, something stirred hope, perhaps, or the first flicker of belief. The dragons finished the noodles and looked at the human again. Instead of hissing, they leaned closer, sniffing her hair, nudging her hands with their warm snouts. She reached out, slowly, carefully, and touched one of their scaled heads. It did not bite. It did not burn. It purred a low rumble. Like thunder softened by rain, the nobles gasped. No one in the galaxy had ever touched the emperor's hatchlings without being scarred. And yet here was a human stroking their scales as if they were harmless pets. The emperor rose from his throne, his golden crown catching the light. His voice was low but carried through the hall. "Leave us." The nobles bowed, protesting softly, but his glare silenced them. Soon, only the emperor, the human nurse, and the baby dragons remained. The emperor stepped forward, his heavy boots echoing against the scorched floor. The dragons hissed at first, wings twitching. But when the human lifted her hand, they calmed. They obeyed her. The emperor's eyes narrowed. He had fought wars, commanded fleets, ruled worlds, and yet this simple human had done in minutes what his empire could not achieve in months. "Who are you?" he asked quietly. The woman looked up at him, her hand still resting gently on a dragon's head. Her voice was calm, steady. "A nurse," she said. "That is enough." The emperor studied her for a long moment. In his heart, pride warred with shame and hope battled disbelief. For the first time in his reign, he felt as though the future of his empire no longer rested in his armies, nor in his crown but in the hands of a human who dared to treat his dragons not as monsters, but as children. And in that silent nursery, filled with the soft sound of baby dragons purring, the emperor realized that everything had changed. The palace whispered for days about the human nurse. Some called her foolish. Some called her a miracle. Others insisted it was only luck that the dragons had been too tired to attack. But deep down, all of them were waiting for the same thing: her failure. For no one believed peace could last. The emperor himself watched closely. He had seen the nurse calm his heirs with noodles, but he did not trust such simple tricks. Dragons were not like other children. Their blood carried storms and fire. What would happen when their true rage returned? The answer came sooner than anyone expected. It was morning when the palace trembled. Servants screamed as smoke poured from the nursery. Glass shattered in the corridors. The dragons had woken hungry and angry. The nobles rushed to the viewing hall, desperate to see the human fall. "This will be her end," they muttered. "She will not survive the fire." The emperor stood in silence, his crown heavy, his eyes fixed on the great doors. Inside, the roars of his children grew louder. Shaking the stone walls, the human nurse entered the chamber alone. The heat was unbearable. Flames licked the walls, black smoke curled toward the ceiling, and the dragons circled like predators. Their golden eyes burned with fury. They snapped their jaws, sending sparks flying. Their wings smashed furniture into splinters. Most beings would have collapsed in fear. The human did not. She stood calmly, her face pale from the heat, but her hands steady. The largest dragon roared and spat fire straight toward her. Gasps echoed from behind the viewing glass. Nobles turned away, certain she would be burned alive. But the human did not run. She reached into her bag. In one smooth motion, she pulled out a bowl of steaming broth and noodles. She held it high, her voice calm but firm. "Food," she said. The dragons froze. The flames sputtered out before reaching her. The smell of broth filled the air, cutting through the smoke. The dragon's eyes widened, her growls turning into confused chirps. The human placed the bowl on the floor, then another, then a third, slowly, cautiously. The dragons sniffed. Their wings folded. Their jaws closed. One by one, they slurped the noodles, tails swishing like excited children. The nursery fell silent. The fire dimmed. The smoke cleared. From the viewing hall, the nobles stared in disbelief. "This is not possible," one whispered. She turned fire into hunger," another said. The emperor leaned forward, his eyes sharp. For the first time in weeks, his heirs were calm. Not beaten, not chained, not caged calm. And all because of a human with simple food. But it was not only the noodles. The nurse sat cross-legged on the scorched floor as the dragons ate. She hummed softly, a tune without words, a gentle rhythm that echoed through the chamber. The dragons tilted their heads, listening. Their growls softened, their tails curled. They ate in peace, soothed by the strange melody. The emperor studied her carefully. This was no accident. She had seen something none of them had: the truth hidden beneath the fire and the claws. The dragons were not monsters. They were children. When the bowls were empty, the dragons nudged her with their snouts, chirping like impatient infants. She smiled and pulled out small pieces of bread, tossing them one by one. The dragons caught them eagerly, leaping and snapping, but never once turning their fire against her. She had turned a battle into a game. The nobles were furious. "This is not strength." One shouted, "This is trickery. She tempts them with scraps like animals." Another sneered, "This is not worthy of the emperor's heirs. They must be taught discipline, not fed like pets." But the emperor silenced them with a single gesture. His gaze never left the nursery. He saw what they could not. The dragons trusted her. They obeyed her, not out of fear, but out of choice. The human rose slowly, brushing ash from her clothes. The dragons crowded around her, their scales glowing faintly, their wings folding neatly at their sides. One even laid its word of the human nurse spread like wildfire. From the lowest servant to the highest noble, everyone whispered the same unbelievable truth. The emperor's baby dragons had been tamed, but no one understood how. The palace guards who stood near the nursery swore they heard strange sounds, soft humming, gentle laughter, the clinking of bowls. The walls that once shook with roars and fire now echoed with purrs and playful thumps. The smoke that once poured from the nursery vents was gone. For the first time in months, the palace air smelled clean. The nobles were restless. Their pride was wounded. Some of them had lost family trying to care for the dragons. Others had wasted fortunes hiring beast tamers and sorcerers. None had lasted. And now, a human weak, fragile, laughable had succeeded with nothing but food and patience. It was an insult. And so they sent spies. One night, while the palace slept, two cloaked figures crept toward the nursery. They moved silently, slipping past guards with hidden tokens of authority. They reached a crack in the great doors and peered inside. What they saw stunned them. The dragons were not raging, not burning. They were curled on soft blankets, their golden eyes half closed, rumbling with deep, contented purrs. One gnawed gently on a wooden toy. Another rested its head in the human's lap. The third swished its tail lazily, watching her with bright, curious eyes. And the human. She was not binding them with chains. She was not shouting commands or casting spells. She was playing. She rolled small balls across the floor, letting the dragons chase them. She gave rewards tiny pieces of bread, bits of roasted meat, sips of broth every time they shared or waited their turn. She hummed softly, a rhythm that seemed to calm their restless energy. She treated them not as monsters, not as beasts, but as children. The spies exchanged glances, their eyes wide with disbelief. This was no sorcery, no power, no strength. It was something far more dangerous in the eyes of the nobles' understanding. The next morning, whispers spread through the palace again. She knows a trick, they said. A secret trick no one else can see. The emperor summoned her. In the great throne room, she stood alone before him. Her plain clothes marked with small scorch marks, her hair slightly singed. The dragons had tested her. That much was clear. Yet her calm never wavered. The emperor's gaze was sharp. You have done what no warrior, no magician, no caretaker could. Tell me, what is your trick? The court leaned forward, desperate to hear. The human bowed slightly. There is no trick, Majesty. They are children. They are hungry, restless, lonely. They lash out not because they are evil, but because no one listens. Murmurs rippled through the hall. Children, a noble scoffed. They are dragons, born of fire and war. Another hissed, do not be deceived. She hides her power. No one could tame them without magic. But the human only shook her head. There is no magic in what I do. I feed them. I play with them. I give them patience, not fear. Respect, not chains. The emperor's eyes narrowed. Respect? You would have me believe that respect calms fire? She met his gaze without trembling. Yes. Fire burns hotter when ignored. But if you feed it, if you guide it, it gives warmth instead of destruction. The emperor fell silent. Around him, nobles seethed. They could not accept it. That a humana, nobody could humble them all with such simple words. That night, the emperor visited the nursery himself. He watched from the shadows as the human worked. She guided the dragons through games, rewarding them with food and gentle praise. When they grew restless, she hummed softly, calming them. When they fought, she made them share. Slowly, the dragons obeyed, not out of fear, but trust. The emperor felt a stirring deep inside. He had tried force, power, command. All had failed. But here was proof that the human was right. Respect, patience, and care could shape his heirs better than any chain. But the nobles could not accept it. They are dragons. Not pets, one snarled in secret. She makes them weak, another spat. If she gains the emperor's trust, what power will she hold? More than us? The court began to plot. And so, in the shadows of the palace, jealousy grew sharper than blades. While the dragons learned trust from their human nurse, the nobles prepared betrayal. The human, unaware of the danger, sat quietly that night with the three dragons curled beside her. She stroked their scales, whispered her songs, and smiled as they drifted into peaceful sleep. But beyond the nursery doors, footsteps echoed, eyes watched, and knives of envy gleamed in the dark. The secret trick had saved her, but it had also painted a target on her back. The palace had changed. Where once the air shook with dragon roars, now it echoed with soft rumbles of contentment. Servants no longer trembled when they passed the nursery. Guards no longer begged to be reassigned. For the first time in months, peace had returned. But not everyone was pleased. In the high halls of the emperor's court, jealousy festered like poison. Nobles whispered behind silk fans and jeweled masks. Generals clenched their fists in silence. Advisors who once promised solutions now avoided the throne, ashamed of their failures. And through it all, one truth stung deeper than any wound. A human had succeeded where they had failed. She has bewitched the heirs. One noble spat. Head in her lap, rumbling with contentment, the emperor's chest tightened. He had never seen them like this, not once. Not even with him. He turned to his court, his voice low and heavy. She has done what none of you could. She has found the way. The nobles bowed, but their eyes burned with envy. For in that moment, they realized the truth. A human now held power greater than all of them. She had tamed the heirs of the empire. That night, the palace was filled with whispers. Servants spoke of the human nurse with awe. Guards repeated the story in the barracks. Merchants carried the tale to the streets. And soon, across the stars, rumors spread of a fragile human who had calmed dragons with nothing but food and patience. But not everyone rejoiced. In the shadows of the court, jealous eyes watched. Plots began to stir. If she can tame the heirs, they whispered, what else might she tame? What else might she take? The dragons slept peacefully that night, curled beside the human nurse, their fiery hearts quiet at last. But beyond the nursery walls, the palace bristled with envy and fear, and the emperor, standing alone in his chamber, asked himself a question that would not let him sleep. Had he gained a savior for his children, or unleashed something far more dangerous? She hides her power, said another. No one can tame dragons without sorcery. It is unnatural. The emperor silenced them with his presence, but he could not silence their envy. At night, when the court dispersed, they gathered in secret chambers, their voices sharp with anger. If the emperor trusts her too much, we lose our influence. She controls the dragons. She controls the throne. She can tame them. Perhaps she can tame him as well. The idea was unbearable. The mighty nobles of the empire, descendants of conquerors, heirs of warriors reduced to shadows by a fragile human nurse. So they began to plot. At first, the schemes were small. They spread rumors in the outer halls. The nurse uses forbidden tricks, they whispered. She feeds the heirs human blood. She sings spells that bind their minds. Fearful servants carried these words through the palace, but the nurse never faltered. She went about her work with quiet calm, feeding, teaching, guiding. The dragons grew calmer each day, their wings folding neatly, their fire sparking only in play. This only made the nobles angrier. One evening the emperor summoned his court. He stood tall on his throne, the golden crown gleaming under torchlight. The dragons lay at the nurse's feet, their heads resting like loyal hounds. She has succeeded, the emperor declared. Where all of you failed, she has triumphed. From this day forward, she is guardian of the heirs. Gasps filled the chamber. The nobles bowed, but inside their rage boiled. A human raised above them. A nurse honored more than they. It was an insult they could not bear. That night, in a hidden chamber beneath the palace, the nobles met again. Candles flickered across their masked faces. This cannot continue, one said coldly. She must be removed, another hissed. But how? They debated through the night, their whispers sharp as knives. At last they agreed on a plan. She has tamed the dragons, yes, their leader sneered. But only under gentle conditions. Let us see her face them when they are pushed into rage. The others nodded. It was clever. If she failed, the emperor would cast her out. If she died, no blame would fall on them. And if by some chance she survived, then surely the dragons would tear her apart sooner or later, so they carried their scheme to the emperor himself, cloaking it as loyalty. "Mighty emperor," they said, bowing low, "we rejoice at your heirs. Calm. But peace in the nursery is not enough. The galaxy must see that the heirs can be controlled in times of fury. If they cannot be calmed in chaos, then what hope is there for the empire's future?" The emperor frowned. He had no desire to risk the fragile peace, but their words carried a sting of truth. If his children could only be quiet in silence, then the empire would still doubt their strength. "What do you propose?" he asked. The nobles hid their smiles. "A trial," they said. "Before the council, before the court, let the nurse calm the dragons at their worst. Then the galaxy will know their strength in yours." The emperor thought long and hard. His instincts warned him, but pride whispered louder. If the trial succeeded, the whispers of weakness would end. His enemies would have no weapon against him. His empire would believe again. "Very well," he said at last. "The trial will be held." The nobles bowed deeply, hiding the triumph in their eyes. Their trap was set. Word of the trial spread quickly. Servants whispered in corners. Soldiers spoke in hushed voices. Merchants in the city below passed the tale from mouth to mouth. "The human will be tested," they said. "She will face the dragon's fire in front of all." The day came. The throne hall was transformed into an arena. Banners of gold and crimson hung high. The nobles filled the seats, their eyes gleaming with expectation. Generals, priests, and emissaries from distant worlds gathered to witness the spectacle. At the center, the dragons waited. Already restless, they growled and snapped, their scales gleaming in the torchlight. Sparks of fire danced from their jaws. The human nurse stood at the entrance, her hands calm at her sides. She looked small compared to the vast chamber, smaller still compared to the three dragons whose wings stretched like storms. The emperor sat on his throne, his gaze heavy. He had ordered the trial, but doubt gnawed at him. If she failed, the peace of his household, and perhaps his empire would shatter again. The nobles leaned forward, their lips curling with anticipation. "Release them." The leader whispered. The great chains of the arena fell away. The dragons roared, their wings struck. The air like thunder. Their eyes blazed and fire erupted across the floor. The heat was unbearable, the sound deafening. The audience gasped as the flames painted the chamber red. And there, in the center of the storm, the human nurse stepped forward, alone. The throne hall had been turned into a furnace. Fire lit the air, smoke curled along the walls, and the cries of the dragons thundered like war drums. The nobles leaned forward in their seats, eyes sharp with expectation. This was the moment they had waited for, the human's fall. The emperor sat on his throne, his face carved from stone, though his fists tightened on the armrests. His heirs circled the arena below, wings spread, claws slashing at the ground. The firelight reflected off their golden scales, making them look less like children and more like the monsters whispered of in legend. And in the middle of it all stood the human nurse. She was small against their towering wings, fragile against their fire. Her plain clothes were already scorched by the heat, her hair blown back by the gusts of flame. Any ordinary being would have collapsed in fear. But her face remained calm, her eyes steady, her steps slow and deliberate. The dragons roared. One spat fire across the floor, the heat so intense the stones cracked. Another beat its wings, sending shards of debris flying. The third charged with a screech, claws extended. The nobles gasped, already whispering of her doom. But the human did not move to fight. She did not raise her hands in defense. Instead, she reached into her bag and pulled out something simple: bread. The charging dragon stopped mid-step, confused. The bread was tossed gently into the air, and the beast caught it in its jaws out of instinct. It blinked, the fury in its eyes dimming for a moment. The crowd erupted in murmurs. She cannot be serious. Bread? Against dragons? She mocks the trial. But the human ignored them. She moved slowly across the arena, tossing food one piece at a time. Each dragon followed her hand, snapping at the morsels. Their fire sputtered, their roars softened into curious growls. Then came the real test. The nobles had prepared cruel tricks. Hidden servants struck gongs, filling the air with sudden violent noise. Sparks were released into the chamber. Explosions of light and sound meant to enrage the dragons further. The beasts shrieked, their wings thrashing. Fire burst from their throats once more, shaking the chamber. The emperor rose slightly from his throne, his heart pounding. Would she fail now? The human stood her ground. She held no shield, no weapon. Instead, she dropped to her knees, her voice rising in song. It was not a grand song, not the chant of a priest or the cry of a warrior. It was a simple lullaby, the kind sung to restless children. The melody was soft, gentle. Threading through the chaos like a stream of water through fire, the dragons froze. Their golden eyes locked on her. Their fire sputtered, dying in their throats. The beat of their wings slowed, the fury in their movements fading into uncertainty. Slowly, they lowered themselves, circling around her. One by one, the beasts lay down at her side, their bodies curling protectively around her, their scales glowing faintly in the firelight. The arena, once a storm, fell silent. The nobles were speechless. She calmed them. With a song? This cannot be. The emperor's chest tightened as he watched. He had seen her calm them before, but this was different. She had not just soothed their hunger or distracted them with food. She had silenced their fury at its peak, turned raging fire into gentle embers. The trial had been meant to destroy her. Instead, it had crowned her. The dragons purred, their rumbling like thunder softened by rain. One nudged her hand, another laid its head in her lap. The humans stroked their scales, her face calm, as if none of the chaos had ever existed. The emperor rose from his throne. His voice carried through the hall, low and powerful. Before all who witness, she has triumphed. You saw it with your own eyes. The heirs bow to her, not out of fear, but of trust. She is their guardian, and no tongue in this court shall deny it. The hall fell silent. The nobles bowed, though their jaws clenched in fury. Their plot had failed. Their whispers had been burned away by truth. But envy does not die easily. As the crowd dispersed, some eyes still gleamed with hatred. If fire cannot destroy her, one noble hissed, then perhaps poison will. Another's lips curled into a thin smile, or steel. The emperor did not hear these whispers. His gaze was fixed on the human, surrounded by his children, their golden eyes glowing in the torchlight. For the first time since their birth, he felt pride not in their power, but in their peace. Yet deep within him lingered a fear he could not shake. If a human could tame dragons with song and bread, what else might humanity be capable of? The court had failed to break her. The dragons had bowed. The empire had witnessed, but the shadows of jealousy had not vanished. They had only grown darker. And as the human led the dragons calmly back to their nursery, the emperor knew one truth above all. This was not the end of her trials. It was only the beginning. The trial was over, but its echoes filled the palace for days. Whispers traveled through every corridor, every hall, every shadow. Servants told the story in trembling voices. Guards repeated it in the barracks. Nobles muttered in disbelief. The dragons bowed to her. Calmed fire with a song. She tamed the heirs of the empire. What began as rumor soon became legend. The emperor himself could not deny the truth. He had watched his children roar like storms, had seen them spit fire hot enough to crack stone. And yet a human nurse, small, fragile, unarmed, had calmed them with food, with patience, with song. No force of armies, no spell of magicians, no cunning of nobles had ever achieved such a thing. For the first time in months, the emperor walked the palace halls without shame. The roars of his children no longer haunted his nights. The servants bowed deeper, their fear replaced with awe. The empire looked upon him with renewed strength, not because of his crown, but because his heirs were finally tamed, and at the center of it all was the human nurse. she remained simple, humble. She did not dress in silks or gold. She asked for no reward. Every day she returned to the nursery, feeding, teaching, guiding. She showed the dragons games, songs, patience. She taught them not only to eat in peace, but to share, not only to roar, but to listen. The dragons followed her everywhere. Their golden eyes shone brighter when she entered the room. Their tails swished like children greeting a mother. They curled around her as she sang, their bodies warm, their breath soft. Where once they brought fear, now they brought wonder. The emperor called her before his throne. The great hall was filled with nobles, generals, emissaries from distant worlds. All eyes turned toward her as she stepped forward, plain as ever. Her head bowed respectfully. The emperor rose from his throne. His voice was steady, his words heavy with meaning. You have done what none could. You tamed my heirs. You gave peace to my house. For this, you shall be more than nurse. From this day forth, you are guardian of the imperial bloodline. Gasps rippled through the hall. The title was sacred, never given to any but the most trusted protectors of the crown. And now it was in human hands. Some nobles clenched their fists in fury, but none dared speak against him. They had seen the trial. They had witnessed the truth. To deny her was to deny the emperor himself. The nurse bowed her head. Majesty, I am only a caretaker. I do not seek power. But the emperor shook his head. Power is not in crowns or swords. It is in trust. And my children trust you above all. That is the greatest power of all. From that day, the empire changed. Stories of the humans spread beyond the palace walls. Carried on ships and whispers to every corner of the stars. On distant worlds, merchants spoke of her with awe. Soldiers told tales of her courage. Priests argued whether her gift was divine and everywhere. One question rose. If a human could tame dragons, what else might humanity achieve? In the colonies, humans who were once ignored or dismissed now stood taller. Alien eyes looked at them differently, no longer with pity, but with wary respect. The story had given their species something they had never held before in the empire: fear, but also honor. Yet not all hearts were at peace. In the shadows of the court, jealousy still smoldered. Some nobles still whispered of poison and steel, but none dared act openly. The emperor's gaze was sharp, and the dragons themselves had become her guardians. Any hand raised against her would meet fire before it struck, and so the nobles swallowed their pride, their envy festering in silence. The nurse, unaware of the weight of her legend, continued her work. She laughed when the dragons played, scolded them gently when they misbehaved, and sang when they grew restless. She did not think of power, or of the empire, or of history. She thought only of the children entrusted to her care. But the galaxy remembered. Generals wrote her name into their records. Poets composed verses about the human who tamed fire. Children on distant worlds pretended to be her, singing songs to imaginary beasts, and in the palace, under the golden banners of the empire, the emperor himself sometimes paused at the nursery doors. He would watch silently as his children curled at the nurse's side, their fire dimmed, their wings folded in peace. For the first time since their birth, he felt hope. He knew his empire was strong. His fleets were vast, his armies countless. But he also knew a truth that humbled him. None of his strength had saved his children. None of his power had calmed their fire. A human had. The emperor would never admit it aloud. But in his heart, he knew his empire's future no longer rested only on thrones and armies. It rested on a fragile human nurse, on the trust of dragons, and on the lesson she had taught them all, that patience was stronger than chains. That respect was sharper than any blade, that even fire could be tamed not with fear, but with love, and so her legacy began. The human nurse, the woman who walked into fire and left with dragons at her side, would be remembered forever. Her story would outlast the nobles, the generals, even the emperor himself. It would echo across the stars as proof of one truth the galaxy had long denied: humanity was not weak. Humanity was not prey. Humanity was something far greater, and all it had taken was a woman, a song, and a bowl of noodles.